Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We're just continuing with our analysis of Ron Paul's speech to the House of Representatives here, March 13th, 2001, the beginning of the end of fiat money. And this is available on his website. I'm not making any of this up. And during one of the two debates this week, Ron Paul said it's perfectly legitimate to take issue with candidates based on political positions that they have taken. So here we go. There's nothing to fear from globalism. I think there's a lot to fear from deregulation, privatization, union busting, the selling off of government assets, essentially the auctioning off of the state sector, which exists in quite a number of countries, the race to the bottom, shock therapy. That's globalization. That's what caused the industrial production of Russia, for example, to go down by about 60% during the 1990s. Russia, the shock therapy in Russia is the latest example of the failure of Austrian economics, right? The deflationary, inflationary and then deflationary crash, which they went through. That was Austrianism all the way. Then he says there's nothing to fear from free trade. Well, free trade essentially means that no government will have any control over commodities crossing its borders. This has been one of the appurtenances of the modern state. If you cannot tax that, you cannot even check up on it. It's not fair trade. It's not managed trade. There is no need for the WTO, World Trade Organization, which is bad. But then you're going to get something worse, which is complete anarchy and the ability, for example, of a government to finance itself using a modest tariff on some commodities or to protect itself against dumping, for example. There'd be no barrier against dumping. This would be the anarcho-capitalist or right-wing anarchist world order. So globalism, which diminishes the role of the state, the inability to protect the citizen, it, of course, magnifies the power of neo-feudal financial groups who are rewarded with no tax on capital gains, no tax on their estates, their inherited wealth. And then we're told that there's nothing to fear from a one-world currency, which would be gold, of course. It would be a one-world commodity currency, which would not be controlled by any government. So he wants it not to be done by the interlocking cabal of privately owned central banks and the Bank for International Settlements and the International Monetary Fund, where the Fed and the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan meet and try to dominate the world. But it's done through the anonymous mechanisms of the market. Now, if you add into this the idea of a completely atomized population, because of these right-to-work laws, right? The role of the trade union, this really deserves some sociological research. Don't wait for the sociologists to do it, but the role of trade unions and their related organizations in the institutional context of modern society in the United States, Europe, Japan, and elsewhere, I think is an absolutely crucial one. And if you simply destroy these unions, you will have gone quite far towards destroying civil society. And civil society is the ability of society to fight back against the inevitable aberrations of the state. So Ron Paul pretends to be the big enemy of statism, but his practical policies would exalt statism in the sense of dictatorship, the negative side of statism, in a way that I don't think anybody else would. Because if there's no union, and again, you see it today. If Walker wants to be a fascist despot in Wisconsin, who's going to fight him? Well, it's the unions that are fighting him. Same thing for Snyder in Michigan, same thing for Daniels in Indiana, same thing for Kasich in Ohio, and I'm sure it's coming. There was even a fight in Maine about a process reform in terms of voting ability. So this is a new world order. This is a one-world recipe, and I think it's dystopian. It would be essentially neo-feudal. I call it neo-Confederate for cultural reasons. It would be hyper-deflationary, because if you make gold the universal medium of exchange, right, the only money that's allowed in the world, that will magnify through deflation. It will increase the wealth of people who have wealth, and it will increase the immiseration of people who have debt. So the moneyed power will be exalted by this return. And again, that's not speculation. Go back to the United States from 1870 to 1900 or 1910, the Specie Resumption Act, the Coin Act, the deed done in the dead of night, the cross of gold, that was the huge issue. In Britain in the 1920s, a return to the gold standard caused unbelievable unemployment. And similarly in Britain, right after the Napoleonic Wars, the horrors of that system, which is cataloged by people as different as Shelley or Byron or Dickens, right? That's that world. This is an empire. This is a world empire. It is a one-world dystopian empire where the nation-state has ceased to exist. There's also the question of Ron Paul's theory of secessionism, right? He relies on these historians that I hold in a minimum high regard. Thomas Woods, who wants to tell you how great nullification and interposition were. These are Confederate doctrines that really ended at Appomattox. They're gone, but he wants to revive them. He wants to nullify the sacrifice of the Union dead and indeed the entire Civil War. And then he's also got this guy DiLorenzo, the resident Lincoln hater and a very, very sloppy historian from a professional point of view. The idea is that secessionism is okay. So you can see this is an attack on the modern state and the undoubted benefits that it has brought in favor, not in favor of something better, because I don't see that at all, but in favor of a one-world empire which would be dominated by an oligarchy of wealth. It would be a worldwide plutocracy. And I think if you look, Ron Paul's argument with the neocons and people like this seems to be the following. Ron Paul basically says, neocons and indeed Brzezinski, you people are wrong. You neocons only want to bomb and invade directly. Can't be done. We don't have the money. Too hated, too isolated, too broke. Brzezinski, you with your color revolutions, but your color revolutions don't always work. And then you want to be able to go to military action like Libya or what you're proposing for Syria and Iran, right, where the color revolutions don't work. He says, I can do it better. I can essentially overcome this resistance not through military means, but through purely economic means. In other words, I'm not going to go and lean on people militarily. I'm going to change the economic structure of the world in a way that will make nation states impossible, so that then the resistance of Syria and Iran and Russia and China will then collapse. So what you'd be left with is the dictatorship of an international plutocracy under, what can we say, unspeakable conditions, right? Worse than Dickensian, right? This would be primitive accumulation of the type we saw in the early Industrial Revolution. No child labor laws. We just had the child labor laws mocked and ridiculed this week in the Republican debates. Ron Paul says Head Start is unconstitutional. That will have to go. Unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance is unconstitutional. That has to go. It'll be privatized, meaning powerful private interests will take this all up. And at the same time that we have the end of the modern state, we also have the end of the traditional family, because the deregulation of marriage simply means that. He's advocating the deregulation of marriage so that whatever setup any church calls marriage will become legal. And I wonder, when you watch these debates, you see how well Ron Paul gets along with Romney, the biggest warmonger. Is there the idea there that if you deregulate marriage, the Mormons could bring back polygamy? I don't know. That seems to be not far from the surface. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.